Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing the top 10. Topic of the top 10? Top 10 TNA moments. And being as at the time of this recording, on Saturday, Impact Wrestling has a pay-per-view called TNA Hard to Kill where they're officially rebranding themselves back to TNA. I've decided to go back and look at my 10 favorite moments from the original TNA run before they rebranded to Impact. Now this is going to include moves, matches, promos, and this is basically my 10 favorite things that have happened in the history of TNA Wrestling. Starting off number 10, from 2005 TNA Genesis, Christian Cage makes his debut. This was one of the first times that a bigger name star from WWE decided to jump to TNA. He crossed the line, as they used to say. Before that, they did have some bigger stars, but most of them came from either ECW or WCW, or were people that WWE fired that weren't quite on Christian's level. This felt like a real, no pun intended, turning point for the company, where they could get a big-time free agent, where they could get someone that would help build their company and they could help build him. To me, this was the equivalent of Chris Jericho jumping to WWE back in the day. Maybe not on the same level, but for TNA's business, it definitely was. Now going from that on number 9. Another debut from the first anniversary TNA show. We had a tag team match with AJ Styles and his mystery partner, who ended up being Six-Pac, Sean Waltman, who he was actually in a feud with leading up to this. And they were teaming up against Jeff Jarrett and his partner making that debut that night. It's Sting! And yeah, I have to do the bad Tony Schiavone every time. This was back in 2003, very early on in TNA's run. And much like I said with Christian, here was a huge star. Arguably the biggest star that WWE didn't have at that point. And he chose to sign with TNA and stayed with TNA for a number of years instead of going to WWE. It kind of felt like the co-sign of Sting made TNA more than what it was before that. Kind of like I said with Christian, Sting's the kind of guy that's absolutely one of the best legends of all time. He's one of the biggest draws of all time. He's always felt like the guy that wrestled for the opposition company, whether that be WCW, TNA, or now even AEW. Even though he had the short stint in WWE, it always felt like he was a guy willing to run opposition. I have such high regards for the wrestler and the man. I'm going to be sad in a couple months from now when he officially retires. Hopefully he still makes appearances, just not in a wrestling capacity, maybe a couple times a year just to come out, because I would love just to see Sting again. I'll go from that on number 8. From one beloved wrestler to another beloved wrestler. From the 8th episode of NWA TNA, when it was still the weekly pay-per-view show, from August 7th, 2002, Ron the Truth Killings, aka R-Truth, wins the NWA World Championship. For anybody that didn't see R-Truth or Ron Killings' run in TNA, especially during this time, he proved there that he could be a serious main event level wrestler. He proved he had everything it takes to be a big star. He's gone down in history as probably the best comedic wrestler of all time. But go back and watch some of this stuff. I know they have it on their on-demand service. Watch just how great Ron Killings was as a heel here. And I know it's not his persona, because you can tell his persona comes through. Even during his TNA run where he was part of 3 Live Crew, you could see that goofiness, that humor come out of him. He's such a great wrestler. I love R-Truth. I love Ron Killings. I am so happy he got this moment. He gets to go down in the annals as one of the NWA World Champions. That's just great to me. I'll go from that on number 7. Probably one of the best examples of a cinematic match, and one that really ignited cinematic matches over the last decade or so, and that's the Final Deletion, Matt Hardy versus Jeff Hardy. And I could have picked a number of things that happened during the Broken Universe, but this was really the one that showed that you could pull off something like this and the fans would watch it and the fans would give a crap about it. This was like seeing a whole new way how to tell an old story. Seeing that you can bring in the bizarre, the weird, that just downright absurd into pro wrestling and have it work. I give Matt Hardy all of the credit in the world, and to a lesser extent Jeff, but Jeff deserves some too. I give Matt so much credit for always changing who he is and always updating himself, changing gimmicks, whether it be Big Money Matt, whether it be V1, whether it be the Hardy Boys or one of the many reunions they've done. He always reinvents himself and he always finds a way to make himself enjoyable. This was an amazing match. I absolutely loved it. Probably one of my favorite cinematic matches. I'll go from that to number 6. From Slammiversary 2005, Raven winning the NWA World Championship. Now, in the annals of TNA history / NWA TNA history / Impact Wrestling history, Raven's championship probably isn't considered one of the great runs they had there. But for me, a guy who's a die-hard Raven fan, to see him get that championship, to see him get another shot after WWE fumbled the ball with him badly, and WCW fumbled the ball to an extent, and ECW had shut down, it kind of felt like Raven was never going to get to be a main guy again. But here we have Slammiversary 2005. And Raven wins the NWA World Championship. Raven gets to be a top star again. For us Raven fans, people that love Raven, this was a great moment. Just another thing showing it wasn't ever anything that Raven did that pushed him down the ladder. It was what other people did. I love Raven. I love this moment. Now going from that, our number 5. From TNA, I believe it was already being called Impact Wrestling at that time. On October 19th, 2006, Kurt Angle making his debut and ultimately getting in the ring and getting in a confrontation with Samoa Joe, what a lot of wrestling websites at the time called the headbutt heard around the world, when he headbutted Joe right in the nose and busted him wide open. Everything I said about Christian, magnify that by tenfold, because where Christian is great and Christian's a Hall of Famer, Kurt Angle is a level above that, and that's no disrespect to Christian at all. I love Christian, I love his work, but you kind of got to look at it like, if we compare this to a sports team, like let's say the old Chicago Bulls of the 1990s, Kurt Angle's probably on the level of a Scottie Pippen, where Christian would be on a Dennis Rodman level. Both of them are great. Both of them are in the Hall of Fame, but there's just a step above. And you notice I didn't say Michael Jordan because there's a step above Angle as well. That's where your Stone Colds, Ric Flairs, where they reside. But Kurt Angle, he's not far off from the top of that. And if you talk about just in-ring capabilities, he's in the top. Here's an interesting thing to think of. Kurt Angle versus Bret Hart. Who was better? You could argue Bret might have been better in the ring, but Kurt Angle was better in promos. Kurt Angle had more depth to his character. When needed to be, Kurt Angle was funnier. And again, not a diss on Bret Hart. Bret Hart's in that top level of Hall of Famers as well. Just something that you don't think about when you think about a guy like Kurt Angle. He's that good. He's one of the top wrestlers that's ever done it. If you did a top 20, he's going to fall right into that top 20 and probably in the top 10. Just an amazing wrestler, a big get for TNA, a big shot across the bow, basically showing, hey, we are serious, we are an alternative, we have one of the best wrestlers in the world here, along with some of the best wrestlers we already had, like AJ Styles and Samoa Joe. A great pickup, one of the best free agent signings in the history of wrestling, in my opinion. And I'll go from that on number 4. This might be the craziest move I've ever seen on a major wrestling promotion. And it's from Turning Point 2004, in a steel cage match with Triple X going up against America's Most Wanted. And you probably already know where I'm going with this, and you could probably see the GIF already playing here. Primetime Elix Skipper walking across the cage and doing a Hootin' Karana on Wildcat Chris Harris. Shout out to Chris Harris. Another guy that doesn't get a lot of respect, but he definitely deserves it. In all of my years watching wrestling, there are very few moves that were as insane as this one is. You could say Mick Foley getting thrown off of the Hell in a Cell. You could point to any of the number of death-defying stunts the Hardys have done off of ladders. But for my buck, if you watch this, just watch how much Elix Skipper struggles to get up on top of the cage in the first place. and just how unsafe his footing was. And then look at how high that cage is from the ground. It was a legitimate 12, 15 feet. If he would have fell off of that cage in the wrong way, he would have injured himself terribly, if not died. And that's not hyperbole. Luckily for us, Elix Skipper is a tightrope walker, hits probably one of the craziest moves I've ever seen. One of the moves that has to be on everybody's top 10 TNA moments of all time. Just an amazing moment in my opinion. Absolutely awesome. I'll go from that on number 3. Probably the best thing that Raka-Khan ever did, and that was just standing there. From Sacrifice 2008, the infamous Steiner math promo. And I'm not going to recite it in its entirety here. I wouldn't remember it. This is great. There's nothing you could say that it isn't. This, to me, is the perfect mixture of absurdity, comedy, and dead seriousness in one package. Scott Steiner always had great promos to me. They were unhinged. A lot of times they didn't make much of sense, but he conveyed his point so well. And this has been repeated and said ad nauseum, and it's just amazing. Just the delivery, the way he presents himself, who he is. It was just fantastic. And again, I can't repeat it because I probably would butcher it, but I will make you a deal. If I get 50 likes on this video, which is a big number for me, I will cut a video doing the entire Steiner math pro. And if it takes long enough, I will reach out to my friend Paul and see if he still can make a chainmail and get the chainmail thing to wear while I'm doing it. That's only if I get 50 likes on the video. So if you want to see that, tell your friends to come watch the video and put a like on here. That being said, one of the great promos of all time, just fantastic. I'll go from that on number 2. One of my favorite matches of all time, and I keep saying this about everything on here, one of the greatest matches of all time in my opinion, from Unbreakable 2005, Samoa Joe versus AJ Styles versus Christopher Daniels. When I think of TNA Wrestling, as much as I think of Kurt Angle, Christian, Sting, the guys that came in and helped build the company with their name, I think of guys like AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, America's Most Wanted, Petey Williams, Chris Sabin, Alex Shelley, and all of the other great talents that were pretty much homegrown or got their first really big national exposure in TNA Wrestling. This is one of the best matches you will ever see. I would put this match right up there with almost anything I've ever watched, whether it be Omega vs. Okada, Flair vs. Funk, Flair versus Steamboat, Undertaker versus Triple H, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, Owen Hart versus Bret Hart. Any match that you want to say is a great match, this is right up there with. This was 3 of the best wrestlers in the world showing off in a way that they could only show off in a TNA ring. It was stuff like this that really put that X Division on the map and made it must-watch television. I really love this match. I'm gushing over it right now. If you haven't seen it, I believe TNA has it on YouTube in its entirety for you to watch. Go check it out. Like I said, one of the great matches of all time. Now, before I get to my number 1, I do a thing here on my top 10s called the best of the rest. Basically, it's things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, my favorite mixed match tag team of all time, Shark Boy and New Jack. And yes, this wasn't just one moment, it was several moments over several weeks. But this was fantastic. Shark Boy was such a great comedic foil, and New Jack leaning into that with knowing what you know about New Jack, especially me being an ECW fan, him leaning into the comedy with Shark Boy, using the Hulk fist as a weapon, everything they did. This was just comedy gold in my opinion. There are times in wrestling where the comedy is just bad and it doesn't hit for anybody, but there are times like this and the aforementioned R-Truth most of his career where the comedy is so good that you could see this playing out on a Saturday Night Live or another variety show and you would laugh just as much. This was so great. I loved it, but it didn't quite make the list. Last but not least on the best of the rest, from Lockdown 2013, Bully Ray turning heel and revealing himself to be the leader of Aces and Eights. This was great. After Bully Ray had convinced Hulk Hogan and the Faces that he was a good guy, that he could be trusted, that he pretty much used Brooke Hogan to get ahead, he was standing up for them against the dreaded Aces and Eights, and he turned. And this was such a great heel turn. The only reason this didn't make the list is there's some parts of Aces and Eights where it kind of petered out, and I don't think that they really ever capitalized on this as much as they could have. This was a real point where you could see Bully Ray, who was thought of as a tag team specialist with Devon being either the Dudleys or Team 3D. This was his moment to shine and become the main guy. And he really took the ball and rolled with it. I loved seeing this. I know Bully Ray gets a lot of flack nowadays, but this was a great turn, and he was a great heel, hence why it was considered, but didn't quite make the list. Now, before I get to my number one, remember, let's smash that like button. If I get to 50, I'm doing the Steiner Math promo word for word. Smash the like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. With that being said, my number one TNA moment of all time, from July 7th, 2010, Jay Lethal and Ric Flair in the woo-off. If you're a wrestling fan, you've seen clips of this. This has to be one of the most viral moments in the history of pro wrestling. The absurdity of Jay Lethal doing a dead-on impression of Ric Flair to Ric Flair, and Ric Flair going absolutely bonkers while Jay Lethal's going bonkers, doing all of Flair's mannerisms with the perfect inflection. This was amazing. This was the peak moment in TNA, and arguably one of the peak moments in wrestling history. One of the most hilarious things I've ever seen inside of wrestling, outside of wrestling, anywhere in the world. I'll put this up against any comedy special I've ever seen, any comedy movie I've ever seen, any comedy album I've ever heard. And I probably laughed more at this than I've laughed at any of those other things I just mentioned. I love Spaceballs. It's one of my favorite movies. I don't think I laughed at Spaceballs as much as I've laughed at this. I love Jackass. I laugh at all of their stuff. Again, I don't think I've laughed at them as much as I laughed at this one little promo, which is probably, like I said, one of the most viral things that's ever happened in pro wrestling. With all that being said, that's my opinion of the 10 best moments in TNA wrestling history. I hope they go another 20 years so then I can do another top 10 of the rebirth of TNA. I'm excited to watch Hard to Kill this weekend. With all that being said, if you made it here to the end, remember, smash the like button, 50 likes. Steiner Math. Let me know in the comments what your favorite moment in TNA wrestling history is. You can include Impact if you'd like, or when they were Global Force for a few short months if you'd like. I tried to keep it just to TNA for this, but you can do whatever you like. Just let me know what your favorite moment in TNA history was. It one on my list? Was it something different? Maybe you liked the Tito Ortiz debut. I know, nobody liked that. Maybe Gail Kim vs. Awesome Kong, which is another great rivalry in TNA history, which could have been on here for any of their matches. Maybe that's your favorite moment. Let me know again what you think. Put it down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.